The wind howled against the fuselage as Ethan tightened his grip on the yoke, his pulse steady but his mind racing. The night sky stretched endlessly before him, moonlight casting a silver glow over the rugged terrain below. He could hear the distant roar of engines. Dante and his men were closing in. Ethan's jaw tightened. They weren't just after the plane, they were after him. Beside him, Ava checked the fuel gauge, her brow furrowing. "We're running low," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the aircraft. Ethan already knew. The sabotage had done its damage. They had enough to get clear, but no room for mistakes. He adjusted their heading, angling toward the canyons. If they could make it through, they'd have the advantage. Far below, headlights sliced through the darkness, weaving across the uneven ground. Dante's convoy was relentless, racing along the dirt roads in a desperate attempt to keep up. He had underestimated Ethan once before. He wouldn't make that mistake again. "They're not backing off," Ava said, glancing out the side window. "They think we'll have to land." Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip firm. "Then we don't give them the chance." With a calculated tilt, he sent the plane dipping into the canyon, weaving between towering rock formations. The walls closed in, the air currents unpredictable, but Ethan knew these skies. Dante was stuck on the ground. And tonight, he was about to learn Ethan's steel never lost in the air. The air felt heavier, thick with an unspoken tension that made every second stretch longer. Marcus narrowed his eyes, noticing a flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. Something was wrong. Chloe sat beside him, oblivious for a moment, until she caught the same shadow slipping between the headlights behind them. A chill ran down her spine. They weren't alone. The low hum of the aircraft's engine wasn't enough to drown out the distant roar of engines approaching fast. Then it happened. Headlights flared to life in the distance, racing toward them like hungry predators in the night. Marcus's grip tightened around the controls. This wasn't just about escaping anymore, it was a hunt, and they were the prey. He exhaled sharply, heart pounding, calculating the time they had left before those chasing them closed in. "Marcus," Chloe's voice was tight with urgency, "they're coming." He didn't hesitate. The landing strip ahead was rough, barely enough for takeoff, but there was no other option. The plane rattled as he pushed it to its limit, the wheels skimming over the uneven dirt like a skipping stone over water. Every second counted. The SUV behind them surged forward, closing the distance. Derek was behind the wheel. Marcus could imagine the rage twisting his features. This wasn't just a chase, it was personal. With one final pull, the plane lifted, breaking free from the ground. Marcus kept his hands steady, refusing to look back. He knew what was happening behind them. He knew Derek wouldn't stop. But up here, in the sky, Marcus had the advantage. And he wasn't about to let it slip. Marcus pushed the plane higher, the engine roaring as he banked left, creating more distance from the airstrip. Below, Derek's SUV roared to life, headlights slicing through the night. The vehicle bounced over the rugged dirt road, tires kicking up dust as it tried to keep pace. From the co-pilot's seat, Chloe stole a glance at the side mirror. "They're not giving up," she muttered, her fingers gripping the edge of the control panel. Marcus kept his voice steady, though his heart pounded. "Let them try," he said, adjusting the yoke. The plane's landing gear groaned as it fought against the uneven ground, then, at last, it lifted free, soaring into the open sky. He exhaled slowly, but he didn't relax, there was no time for that. "Gear up," he ordered. Chloe flipped the switch, and the soft hum of the wheels retracting filled the cockpit. Marcus kept climbing, but his eyes flicked to the fuel gauge. His jaw tightened. The sabotaged fuel lines had drained more than he expected. They had just enough to get away, but only if he played it smart. Below, the SUV kept moving, its headlights bouncing wildly over the rough terrain. It was heading for a stretch of open highway that ran parallel to their flight path. Chloe knocked on the side window with her knuckles. "They're racing us," she said. "Probably think we'll have to land nearby." Marcus set his jaw. Derek wasn't just after the plane, he wanted revenge. Being humiliated, losing control of his operation, being outmaneuvered. Derek wouldn't let it go. He'd chase them until there was no other option. Marcus adjusted their heading, aiming for the jagged canyons ahead. He knew those winding passages well, had flown through them countless times during Air Force drills. The sudden gusts and narrow rock walls were a death trap for inexperienced pilots. But for Marcus, they were an advantage. He kept his grip firm, pushing the plane toward the cliffs. Derek's men had no way of following him up here, but they were desperate. Below, the SUV swerved onto a narrow path running along the canyon's edge, still trying to keep up. The terrain was treacherous, uneven, and full of deadly drop-offs. They weren't built for this chase, but desperation made men reckless. Chloe's breath caught. "They can't keep this up," she said, half in disbelief. Marcus didn't respond. His focus was on the final stretch, a deadly S-curve known for sending vehicles over the edge. The wind howled, slamming against the plane's wings. He adjusted the rudder, compensating for the turbulence, his movements precise. Below, the SUV hit the turn too fast. The tires lost grip. For a moment, it wobbled, struggling to regain control. Then, the back end swung out. Gravel sprayed into the night. The vehicle twisted sideways, teetering on the edge for a split second, then it was gone. Chloe gasped as the SUV flipped, spiraling down the canyon wall. The headlights spun, flashing wildly before they vanished into the darkness below. A distant crash echoed through the cliffs. Marcus didn't look down. His hands stayed steady on the controls. He had expected this. Maybe even counted on it. Men like Derek always pushed too far, unable to accept defeat. They thought they could control everything. Until they lost it all. Chloe's voice was quiet. "Marcus." They went over. His gaze remained forward. The plane climbed higher, leaving the canyon behind. "I know," he said simply. The chase was over. The fight was done. But Marcus didn't feel relief, just a cold certainty. Derek was gone. And with him, the last threat to Marcus's freedom had vanished into the dark. Marcus gripped the controls, eyes locked on the canyon ahead. The plane skimmed just above the jagged rocks, its wings slicing through the night air. The fuel situation was bad, but stopping wasn't an option. Below, Derek's SUV raced along the winding dirt roads, headlights bouncing wildly. The terrain was brutal, but they weren't giving up. Chloe kept glancing out the window. "They're still with us," she said, tension clear in her voice. Marcus tightened his grip. Not for long. He angled the plane toward a narrow gap between the cliffs. Wind howled through the canyon, slamming against the aircraft. He adjusted the throttle, keeping it steady. One wrong move and they'd slam into rock, but Marcus wasn't afraid. He had flown this path before. Below, the SUV struggled to keep up. The narrow roads twisted dangerously, forcing Derek's men to slow down. They had made a mistake following him in here. Chloe leaned closer to the glass. "They're losing ground." Marcus didn't answer. His focus was ahead, on the final stretch. The canyon walls tightened, leaving only a thin passage. He pushed the plane forward, cutting through the wind. The turbulence fought back, shaking the aircraft. Down below, the SUV's tires skidded over loose gravel. The vehicle swerved, barely clinging to the road's edge. Then, suddenly it went too far. The back tires slipped. Chloe gasped as the SUV tilted, its headlights swinging wildly. For a second, it hung on the edge. Then, gravity took over. The vehicle tumbled, flipping violently down the canyon wall. Sparks flew. A distant crash echoed. Marcus exhaled. It's over, he said. The night swallowed the wreckage behind them. They were free. Marcus guided the plane higher, the darkness stretching endlessly ahead. The wrecked SUV was far behind, lost in the depths of the canyon. Chloe sat back, releasing a shaky breath. I can't believe it, she murmured. Derek's gone. Marcus didn't respond immediately. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind raced. It should have felt like victory. Instead, something gnawed at him. Something wasn't right. Then, the radio crackled. Static, then a voice. Steele. Thought you could just fly away? Marcus's blood ran cold. It was Derek. Chloe's eyes widened. That's impossible. But it wasn't. Marcus clenched his jaw. Derek had planned ahead. He must have had a backup, another team waiting. The SUV had been a distraction. The radar screen flickered. A small dot appeared. Not below, above. Marcus's stomach dropped. They have a plane. A second later, bright lights cut through the night sky, coming straight for them. Chloe cursed. What do we do? Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled the controls hard, sending their plane into a steep dive. The pursuing aircraft followed, gaining fast. This isn't over, Derek's voice sneered over the radio. Marcus gritted his teeth. It will be. Chloe clutched the seat as Marcus weaved through the night, their plane twisting and turning. The chase wasn't over. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to fight their way out. Marcus's grip tightened on the controls as the enemy plane stayed on their tail. The engines roared, the sky around them stretching like an endless battlefield. Chloe checked the fuel gauge, her face pale. We don't have much left, Marcus. He already knew. They had one shot at this. The radio crackled again. Derek's voice, calm and mocking. You can't run forever, Steele. Marcus didn't reply. Instead, he focused ahead on the canyon system below. If he could lure Derek into those narrow passes, maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables. We're heading down, he said. Chloe's eyes widened. Are you insane? That's suicide. Not if we're better than them, Marcus shot back. The plane tilted forward, plunging toward the canyons. Wind screamed past as Marcus maneuvered, skimming dangerously close to the jagged rock formations. Derek's plane followed, pushing in closer, refusing to let them escape. Chloe clutched her seat. Tell me you have a plan. Marcus exhaled sharply. I do. I just hope he's arrogant enough to take the bait. The walls of the canyon loomed ahead, twisting and turning. One wrong move, and it was over. But Marcus knew these skies. He knew exactly where to go. Behind them, Derek's plane edged closer, his confidence growing. That was his mistake. Marcus's eyes flicked to a sharp bend ahead. If he timed it right, this would be the moment everything changed. The canyon walls blurred past as Marcus pushed the plane to its limits. Derek was right behind him, matching every move. The radio crackled. You're out of tricks, Steele, Derek sneered. Marcus's jaw tightened. We'll see about that. Ahead, the canyon narrowed into a sharp turn too sharp for a plane at this speed. Any normal pilot would slow down. Marcus didn't. Instead, he yanked the controls hard, tilting the plane sideways, slicing through the gap with barely inches to spare. Derek followed, but he was half a second too slow. The canyon walls rushed toward him. His plane tilted, wings scraping the rock. Sparks flew. A moment of panic crackled through the radio. Then an explosion. Chloe gasped as fire lit up the canyon behind them. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his hands steady. He's gone, Chloe whispered. Marcus didn't celebrate. He simply leveled the plane, guiding it upward, out of the canyon, into the open sky. The fight was over. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe. The horizon stretched ahead, endless and free. We made it, Chloe said softly. Marcus nodded. Yeah. We did. The sun was rising as Marcus eased the plane onto the familiar airstrip. The wheels touched down smoothly, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. As the engines hummed to a stop, Marcus finally let go of the tension gripping his chest. Chloe climbed out first, stretching her sore muscles. That was close, she muttered. Marcus ran a hand over the plane's scratched fuselage. Too close. His phone buzzed. A message from Mitch, no sign of Derek. Law enforcement's looking, but they won't find much. It was over. No more threats. No more running. Chloe leaned against the wing, watching him. What now? Marcus looked at the open sky, a slow smile forming. We fly. Chloe smirked. Figured. As the plane rolled back into the hangar, Marcus knew one thing: he had won his freedom. And no one was taking it from him again.